So 8th of December 2025, as I said in my last post, this is a longer post on those two books. So these are Elementary Lessons in Electricity and Magnetism by Sylvanus P. Thompson. What I have here is a 1897 edition, well, reprint based on the 1895 new edition. So this, let's just say the 1895 data, and this is 1943. Actually a reprint of a 1915 new edition. So the reason I'm saying that is because there's a reason for it, so make sure we understand that between those two books, the actual data is 20 years difference. So 1895 and 1915. And what's interesting about it is the fact that I'm going to read you a little bit of the introduction in there. But it's the main thing that you find again. I went over about 30 pages at the start to compare, maybe a bit more than 30 pages, about 50 pages I've compared between the two books to see what changed. And again, the main thing that changed unexpectedly is on the subject of mercury. There's no escape from this topic for some reason. And I will put another post on this because I've actually started going through all my dictionaries and encyclopedias, which are kind of 1800 around that time, and the 1910 versions, and you know, it's just different information. So I'm going to do a separate post. So we've got the mercury issue coming up again, and secondly, names of inventors disappearing in the next edition, which I thought, how interesting is that you know, people who have done the work, their name is removed. And that's how interesting. So you're forgetting, you know, it's almost like, I don't know, making the real person disappear in history, perhaps. But anyway, what I'll do is I'll read a little bit of introduction here. So in this edition, just so that you know, it is available on archive.org. You will find the 1906 edition, print edition, which is actually a reprint of the 1895 actual text. So it is on archive.org. So just type in this and you'll get the book. But if you want to learn about electricity and magnetism, it's fantastic anyway. So I'll read you something at the start and I'll just change the camera around and you can see the differences for yourself. I didn't expect names of people to disappear. That's why it took me by surprise. And I was able to actually find information about those people. But you can see how, you know, maybe a few decades down the line, they will have completely disappeared. But here's very interesting. In this 1895 preface, it says, these elementary lessons have now been largely rewritten. The considerable changes made have been necessitated not only by the progress of the science, but by the piracy, covert as well as open, to which, since its appearance in 1881, the book has been subjected. And, you know, it did make me chuckle. So even back in the late 1800s, they were having piracy problems and probably plagiarism and such things. So that was evidently a problem. The original book was written in 1881. There was a new revision solidly written in 1895, and that's in 1915. So I haven't got the 1881 edition, unfortunately. So let me turn the camera around and let's have a look. All right, so I've tried to make it as clear as possible. This is the 1895 edition of the original text. 1897 actually printing, the actual printing was here. You can see it 1897, but the original text was 1895. And here, same. So this is a new edition 1915, but this printing is 1943, just to be clear. So here we have the prefaces. This is the second preface, 1915. Sylvanus P. Thompson died in 1916, so that was just before his death. And this is a long preface. This is only a short one, with magnetic lines. And if you look at the content, what I find interesting is there's definitely a change at the end because there were more discoveries. But this is, considering this is data from 1895, frictional electricity, magnetism. Current, electricity, electrostatics, electromagnetics, measurement of currents, thermoelectricity, heat, power and light from electric currents, inductance, dynamo and transformers, Then we have electrochemistry, telegraphy, telephony, electric waves, and the appendix. And what we find here is very much the same chapters, but a little bit more. So this is 1915. And we find some slight changes there with transmission and distribution of power, electric traction, electrochemistry, telegraphy, electric waves, and wireless telegraphy. So this is 1915. They were getting on already quite well there with the wireless. Electron theory and electricity. And then appendices. Now, when we actually go into the first, I looked through, I've compared all these pages, and they were all the same. So we right onto page 19 here. And the first change is the removal of this Henley's semaphore, which is a method of sending signals. So I went and looked at that, and I did find who William Henley was. And it's not Lord Henley of the railways. I made a little note here. It was a chap, an English chap, 1743 to 1832, English electrician who was a collaborator of Benjamin Franklin, mid to late 1700s. Now, that was totally removed from this book. Okay, so that was a bit strange why that would be the case, but it was. And at first I thought, okay, fair enough. But then, you know, I continued looking through, and it's all the same. Again, up to about this point here, page 37, where quite rightly there's been a list. The list is slightly expanded. It's a list of conductor. You'd think, you would hope that would have occurred as more discoveries took place. Then we move again, no changes. But then we get to this one. So that's point 44 here. And here it's slight differences as it's changed. But we find that on 43 here, that's the same. But right at the end of 43, there's a whole section there about names. It's here. We see here, in a more modern form, due to Leroy and modified by Winter, there is but one rubber and flap occupying a little over a quadrant of the plate, and one collector or double row of points. So anyway, there's a little section there, but it's actually important. And I mean, it's important from what I was reading about. Now, Leroy was actually a French physicist who contributed to quite a lot of discoveries. And it talks about Winter here, which actually refers to a German chap called Winkler, although his English version was Winter. And he was also, quite knowledgeable German physicist. But for some reason, their names are removed. Then we come to point number 44. And we're back again to amalgams. And it goes on about mercury here. But the interesting thing is that this whole section has been removed. And here we have a guy called Canton. And again, I checked it out. John Canton was a very important English physicist who actually was involved in quite a number of discoveries. But all that section here on mercury just disappeared. This name's also gone. Kuhn-Meyer's amalgam. And obviously amalgam refers to mercury here. And he was an Austrian physicist, and that's all gone. Which is really, really interesting, because you see here precautions in using frictional machines. But in that section, all the names of the individuals have disappeared. And I thought, how interesting is that? And particularly his little section here on, another use of mercury. And there's some slight differences there again on the mercury. But what that really did surprise me, why are names of people removed? Because then you don't know the source. Why are they removed? And it's not just one name, it's several names. So that was the first thing, but that's up to page 50. And then, just as a little point of interest, towards the end, page 77. Here you go, let me just take that. It says other sources of electrification. And here, it's quite interesting. It's called different sources of electrification. And, oh, that's the wrong one here. Here you go, sorry. Animal electricity, piezo electricity. I mean, all this was well known. It's well described. I mean, I actually didn't know this because I covered that at university briefly. But you realize how much is known. Well, I mean, this is This in the 1881 book, I expect this will have been here. But it's just well known. So you're looking at 150 years ago. This stuff is well known. And then there's a little section here on animal electricity. And I thought it was quite interesting. And also electricity of vegetables. And it gives a name of a person there. And what was 83, isn't it? Sorry, let me just double check here because I can't remember now. 83, no, 79, sorry. Let's just make sure. Oh, interesting. Didn't check that. Oh, here we are. Sorry. Animal electricity and vegetables. Here you go. So the name's still there. But things have changed there. And what's interesting is it says here, Buff thought, so whoever that individual is, I didn't check it out. Buff thought he detected electrification produced by plant life, the roots and juicy parts being negatively and leaves positively electrified. The subject has, however, been little investigated. Now, I do want to point something out on that because I think this is incorrect. You will remember that I mentioned that book, The Invisible Rainbow. I did that in another post. And I do want to say that if you do get hold of the book, it is online as a PDF. Somebody's put it online as a PDF, although it's quite a recent book. Go to chapter 6, The Behavior of Plants, and there is a chap here, Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, almost forgotten in history books, and yet extraordinary discoveries on the subject of plant electricity. Worth your while if you're interested, because a fantastic amount of experiments on growing plants, what type of electricity can kill them off, what doesn't, and also what electricity the plants actually contain. So this is quite interesting, and this is another book that I have mentioned to you about electricity, which collects, I just want to show you again. If you haven't seen my other post on this, you really should see it, because the book, I just want to show you this, a third of the book, I mean, you're looking at, was it page 397? You're looking at about 150 pages, almost 200 pages of references going back to 1700. So there's a lot more on electricity and a lot more which definitely has been hidden. So here we are. Interesting. Go to archive.org and you can get these books and have a look for yourself.